All of us at Geringhoff would like to thank you for taking the time to view this video. You will find the information presented here to be informative and helpful in performing service to Geringhoff harvesting machines. Whenever servicing a Geringhoff product, please observe all safety decals and warnings. Use factory-supplied safety supports on the combine and the Geringhoff head. Use the proper safety equipment required for the task. This may include, but is not limited to, eye protection, foot protection, hearing protection, proper clothing, hand protection, proper tools, and other equipment and supplies as required for the service to be performed.
Hi, this is Geringhoff Product Support. Today we're going to talk to you about some of the monitors and the electrical components of the corn heads from Geringhoff. So, prior to 2011, we used these two monitors. This is for a rigid head, and this would have been for a folding head. If you go back far enough in age, the first folding heads didn't have this switch here. This was added in later. But most folding heads are going to have this switch, and it's just an on-off switch to send power to a solenoid block on the head to switch between deck plates and the folding operation. The other thing that these monitors will show is we have a window here that's going to give a speed readout as far as sensing the speed off the sensor on the head for the shaft rotation for the gearboxes. And then across the bottom is a row of LED lights that light up depending on the opening of the deck plates, whether they're closed or open. And both boxes are the same in that respect. They both will give a speed reading and a deck plate opening, and don't give us very much else for information. There is not a lot of diagnostics we can do with these. They will give an error 0 or an error 1. Sometimes they'll say error 2. Doesn't really tell us specifically what our problem is. It just tells us that we have a communication problem between the monitor and the sensors on the head, which would be the deck plate or the speed sensor. In 2011, we changed to a different style monitor. We have a rigid monitor, and then a monitor that we'd use if either it's a folding head or a rigid head with an ICF system or a folding head with an ICF system. And not a lot of information will come off of this rigid monitor. When it first comes on, it will tell us how many hours are on the monitor. And then it's going to tell us what our deck plate opening is and the speed the head's running at. So there it's telling us what it's reading for speed. And gives us a deck plate opening. The other monitor is giving us the same information as far as deck plate reading and speed. One difference is on the rigid head, the speed reading is solid. On the folding head, ICF head monitor, the speed is flashing, and that's because we can adjust the software in this monitor to match the head. And when we do that, the engineers have programmed into the software a desired speed for the head to run at. And if we're within that range, the monitor will display a solid speed reading. And if we're out of that range, it's going to flash to tell us that we are either above or below the desired range for the head that's programmed in. So similar to the older monitors, on the rigid head monitor, there's not a lot of diagnostics that it will do. It will give us an error 0, error 1, error 2. Again, doesn't tell us much more than we have a communication problem between the monitor and the sensors on the head. So it could be a sensor that's bad, it could be a wiring harness that's bad, but doesn't tell us much more than that. With the other monitor here, our multifunction monitor, that gives us a diagnostic menu that we can access. And to get into the diagnostic menu or the service menu, push and hold the outside two buttons, and it'll bring up a menu of different options we can look at. To get into the service menu, push and hold the outside two buttons. Now we have menu comes up. The 4 buttons across the bottom correspond to the icons on the screen. So this button is a down button, this one's an up. This lets us select a menu. This one escapes back to the previous screen. So if we want to change the brightness, click OK. And when we're done, escape. Same with, we can adjust the contrast. These 2 items here, valve test and sensor test, are what we're going to be most concerned with as far as things that we can do to test components. Operating hours tells us how many hours are on this monitor. So in this case, we have 6.5 hours on the monitor. And then if we push and hold the first button, it goes into another menu. It says type of head. And this is where we would select what kind of head we're putting on, and that's what determines whether the monitor is going to flash at 750 or if it's going to flash at 780. It's the different choices for heads. Most of the time we're going to be either on a Rotodisc or a North Star or perhaps a Horizon. Just select the head you want, click OK, and now the monitor has set the parameters to match that head. Go back a screen, and we can go back to our 2 main tests that we use if we're having problems with the anything in the field. The valve test is probably the one that person is going to use the most. It works really good for fixing problems with folding heads that have been parked for a while, where the lock pins have come out or the bonnets have dropped down. It allows us to go in and turn valves on and off, to do them individually and bypass any of the sensors, especially on a folding head that's folded up. Once it's folded up, it is programmed to lock out all hydraulic functions and only stay in the folding function, and we need to move the lock pins and the bonnets back into operating position. This will let us do that. And so right now it's got a box around Y1, and we want to move to one of the other functions. Just use the arrow buttons across the bottom to go to those. And once we decide which function we want to activate, say we're going to activate Y2. We put our highlighted box on Y2, push the 3rd button over, puts a black box on Y2. That now tells me that we're sending power from the box here down to the computer on the head to open the valve for the Y2 function. And we can turn that on and off. Y1 is our deck plate function. And as you see here, it says E3 question mark. It's telling me that it's reading that the head is folded up. It's not seeing the fold sensor, and it's going to wait until it sees that fold sensor come back into view. And we'll look at the sensor page here in a little bit. It's a safety feature to make sure we never move the deck plate cylinders when the head is folded up. Because if we do, then when we fold the head back down, we're going to bend that deck plate rod because it'll be out of position. So the next thing we can do is we can do a sensor test. Here's our list of sensors that it's looking for. And right now we don't have any sensors highlighted. Now it's telling me that it sees the E3 sensor. Put a black box on E3. And the E3 is the sensor for the fold. And that was the question mark when we were doing that valve test and wanted to turn on the Y1. So if we escape out, go back up to our valve test. Now it lets us turn the Y1 function on. We could move our deck plates. And depending on how the head's set up, you may or may not have anything for the other sensors, E4, E5, and E6. E6 is telling us that this monitor is looking for an ICF system. So if, say, you don't have an ICF system and that comes on, that's going to tell us that we have some problem with the wiring harness somewhere. Not very often we see a problem with that, but it can happen. But the most common problem you're going to run into is this E3, and that's the sensors down on the head for the fold. E4 and E5 are sensors on an ICF system, and if it's showing that it has an ICF system, it's going to be looking for those two sensors if it's a folding head. A rigid head with an ICF does not have any sensors on it, but it still uses this box because we need the multifunction buttons to switch between the real functions. But on a rigid ICF head, the computer is set up such a way that the fold button doesn't have any function at all. So if you got a folding head and you can't get folding operations to work, you go in and you look and E3 is not highlighted. That's telling us then that we're not getting a signal back from the sensors down on the head. And it can be any number of different reasons for that. One of the first things to check is to go down on the head. There's a sensor on each side, and look to see if we're getting power to those sensors. And we'll give you a quick demonstration on how we can check that with the sensor here on our test box. So there's a pair of sensors like this. The sensors are actually mounted in the main frame, down where the wings come together. And the monitor is going to be looking for these sensors to see a piece of metal in front of it. We use a bolt on the head, but when your head's folded up, you can put any piece of metal in front of it. And there's some holes around the base, and there's a light that comes on in there when we have power coming to the sensors and they're reading that something is in front of them. So on a folding head, there's two of these sensors, one on the left, one on the right. They are wired in series. And so the left one has to light up first to send power to the right. And then if the right one lights up as well, then it's going to be sending a signal back to the computer and back to the monitor. The sensors are the same on both sides. So if you're testing and don't see any light on the left-hand side, you can take the sensor from the left off and take the sensor from the right and put it in place. And if it lights up, then we know that the left sensor is bad, and that's where our problem is. If it doesn't light up, the odds of two sensors being bad are somewhat remote. Most likely we have a wiring problem. The most common wiring problem is going to be in the wiring harness that comes out of the frame and connects into the bottom of the sensor. So take the This sensor is going to be mounted in a little white plastic block. Take the 2 bolts out that hold that sensor in place, pull the wire out, and quite often you're going to find damage to the wiring harness in the first 12 to 18 inches. Quite often rodents will get in there and chew on the wires, and so it's going to be a wiring problem. That's the most common problem we'll see with this sensor. Go back to operation. So we were talking about, that both monitors are going to show us our speed and our deck plate reading. So down on the head, this is our deck plate sensor, and that this bar has a small magnet embedded in it, and it goes through here and it just slides back and forth inside this box. And inside the box is a set of resistors. There's 3 bands in here. With the old style monitors from 2011 and prior, it always lights up each individual light. We've been using this same sensor since before the new models came out in 2012. The new software in these models is a little more sensitive. If you've got a customer that says that they can't get their deck plates to stop at like 2 or 7, that is not a problem with the monitor. It's not a problem with the wiring harness or the computer. It's just how the software reads the bar as it slides through this sensor. There's in the transition ranges between the resistances in this bar are kind of like, have to say dead spots in what the monitor will read. So it's quite often when we're opening and closing the deck plates that the deck plate readout will not stop at say 2 or maybe 3. It'll skip that right over, and also around 6 and 7 is quite often it will never read one of those numbers because the sensitivity of the software in the box here is more sensitive than the readout sent back from the sensor. So for the multifunction monitor, one of the other components besides the monitor is the computer that goes down on the head. And there's 3 different variations of this computer depending on what it is set up for. This is a computer that is set up for a folding head with ICF. So it's got these leads here to run the solenoid valves. It has these 2 leads here to get the deck plate reading, speed sensor reading, and also read the sensors for the ICF system. One of the first tests we'll do if we think that there might be a problem, if we're getting like an error 0, is are we getting power from the monitor to the computer? If you open the cover up and look inside, there's a LED right here that's flashing. When that's flashing, that tells us that we're getting power from the monitor to the computer. If there's no light there, it's not getting any. Then the next thing we can do is if we know that we're getting power, we want to see if we're getting power sent out to the different functions, we can turn on a valve, and it's going to light up a pair of lights in here to tell us that that circuit is activated for a valve. It's kind of hard to see, but it actually does turn on more than one at a time if we wish. Generally, we're only going to work with one at a time. But those are some tests that we can do to see if we're getting power and we're getting power sent out. If we're getting power in the box and it says that we're getting power sent out, the other thing we can look for on the head is off of each of these is going to be another short wiring harness plugged into it with a plug like this that goes to the solenoid valve. And right up here in the corner is an LED light that's going to come on and off whenever the valve is turned on and off. So if we're having problems with getting power to here, one of the things to check, just go out and check your wiring harness to make sure, well, first make sure it's plugged in between the corn head and the combine. Check the wiring harness to look and see if it's any damage to it anywhere. One place to check is up in the cab is this junction box, and there's connections inside this box that connect the monitor to the computer, and it's our power source for the monitor. So it's very first thing to say if our problem is that the monitor won't come on at all. In the wiring harness to the monitor, if it's got a plug like this on it, there is a fuse inside. The other thing to look for is if the plug's been taken off and it's been wired direct, that it's got the correct polarity. The blue wire is ground. The brown wire is 12 volts of power. If those things are correct, sometimes it helps just to take these connections apart, wiggle the wires around a little bit, and put them back together. And this box goes up in the cab. The monitor just plugs into it in the cab. And then the other wiring harness goes out from this box down to the corn head. So, like I was saying before, this computer is set up for a folding head with an ICF system. If it's a rigid head with just an ICF, it's going to look like this. So it's going to have our deck plate function and our reel functions. Sensor for deck plates and speed. And this would be a computer set up for a folding head, deck plates on Y1, the other two for the folding functions, speed sensor, deck plate sensor. And with this one here, it's this wiring harness here that's where it gets plugged into this monitor that tells the computer and tells the monitor that this is a folding head with an ICF system. And so then when it does that, whenever a person's going to fold the head, when you push the button to fold, when you push that button on there to fold, the very first thing it's going to do is it's going to look for the two sensors for the ICF system. It's going to look to see that the reel is lowered to its lowest position. It's going to look to see that the reel is also pushed forward as far forward as it will go. That way when the head folds over, the folding portion of the head doesn't contact the reel. Once it sees that those two sensors light up, then it's going to start the folding process. The folding process at that point all becomes controlled by the sensors on the head and time functions within the computer. So the monitor will push the button to fold. The first thing it's going to do with an ICF system is look to make sure that the reel is in the correct position. If it doesn't have an ICF system, it's going to go directly into the folding process. The folding process is that the monitor is going to send a signal and energize the valves for the bonnets and the lock pins. And so it's going to raise the bonnets, remove the lock pins. That's on a timed sequence. After a period of time, it's going to then energize the valve to send oil to the folding cylinders. And those two functions are going to overlap for 4 or 5 seconds so that the head starts to fold. We're keeping pressure on the lock pins and the bonnets so that they will not drop back in place before the head is folded. And we'll start folding the wings. As the wings fold, it will break away from the fold sensors. And at that point, the monitor is going to stay in the folding process until it sees those sensors come back. So we can stop the folding process at any time once it's gotten past the first couple inches, and it's going to stay in the folding process. if you're folding the head, you push the button and you start folding it, and for some reason you don't continue to fold beyond doing the lock pins and the bonnets, it's going to time out and it's going to revert back to operating deck plates. So you can possibly have the bonnet, the lock pins removed and the bonnets folded up, and goes back to operating normally. And the only way to put them back down is to reactivate the folding sequence and reverse the oil flow to push the bonnets back down, the lock pins back in. When this monitor has been activated, it's going to stay active for about 15 minutes. And if it doesn't see any activity, and when I say activity, if it doesn't see any reading from the speed sensor after 15 minutes, it's going to basically go to sleep. It's a power saving feature so that when you get done, shut the combine off, you don't walk away and have it drain your battery down. If it does go to sleep, just push any of the buttons and it'll wake it back up and you can finish whatever operation you're doing. Once it's in the fold process, it's not going to let us do anything but the fold cylinders until it sees the sensors come back that says the wings folded down. And if, say, the lock pins drifted in or during storage, or maybe it didn't transport between fields, you'll put fold the wings down, the wings will come and hit that lock, they won't finish folding away. We can't get back into operating mode, and that's when we use that service menu, raise the wings back up off so they're not on the lock pins, go into the service menu, go to the valve test, turn on the valve for the lock pins and cycle them and to get them back in the on-lock position. And then we can either, using the service function, go back to the folding cylinders and finish folding it down, or we can just escape and let everything work automatically. The last monitor we're going to talk about is this one here. This is the monitor that we use on the Freedom heads. It's also the same monitors we use on our Draper heads. Each of these buttons on the side will have a function depending on what is assigned to the monitor. And we'll let it have some other features that we can turn lights on and off. It's going to give a deck plate reading and speed reading on the screen here.
On behalf of Geringhoff Product Support, thanks for watching. And as always, if you have any questions about the video you just watched, you can contact us on our service hotline.